issues, and more can often be traced to trauma, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and ultimately, nervous system dysregulation. Meet your autonomic nervous system. Let's call it ANS. ANS takes care of a lot of your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, digestion, and body temperature. ANS also manages your survival and stress response, working to keep you alive when your life is in danger. ANS functions as our built-in detection system, constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. As ANS scans the environment, it has three general responses or states. Safe. You feel calm, relaxed, and connected to those around you. Mobilized. When ANS detects danger, it sends a command and your heart rate and breathing increase, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can handle the threat. This is our fight-flight response. Immobilized. When ANS detects that the danger is so great that you can't fight or run, it shuts you down. In this state, our heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature decrease, and pain-numbing endorphins are released. ANS does all of this automatically without us thinking about it. ANS doesn't just use these states for survival, it uses them to navigate through the world each day. When ANS functions well, it moves fluidly from one state to another, 1 minute mobilized and ready for action, and the next resting and recovering. ANS will often blend states together. When we play, ANS combines the mobilized and safe states, and when we are intimate with loved ones, it combines immobilized and safe states. When ANS can stay flexible and fluid like this, it helps us manage and become resilient to stress and negative events. We're able to bounce back and move on. Unfortunately, when we experience trauma and chronic stress, it can keep ANS from functioning in a healthy, regulated, and resilient way, and can keep us stuck in states of survival. A friendly get-together can become frightening. A simple meeting at work can become threatening. For those with a history of trauma and chronic stress, the ANS detection system often becomes faulty, constantly signaling danger even when we are safe. It's like ANS is an alarm system, constantly signaling fire even when there's no smoke and no flames. Consistently living in these survival states can be debilitating, and we often develop adaptive strategies like using drugs, alcohol, food, work, or sex in an attempt to bring regulation and temporary relief. Understanding how trauma impacts us is critically important. There is a whole spectrum of experiences that can be traumatizing and adversely impact ANS, like accidents, assaults, and natural disasters, which are often called shock traumas. There is also developmental or relational trauma, when we experience chronic adversity, abuse, neglect, and lack of safety while growing up. Many other experiences can be traumatizing, including chronic stress, medical procedures, and adverse community environments like poverty, discrimination, and violence. Additionally, new research in epigenetics shows us that trauma can get passed down genetically at least 3 generations. In the past, we've thought about trauma as events that happen to us. We now know that trauma is an experience, not an event. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. It's our response.
I know that the world is not brilliant at the moment for autistic people. You're not allowed to be autistic unless you're disordered. That's bollocks, but that is today's narrative. You have got to be a problematized, disordered person by definition of DSM-5. If you don't believe me, look it up, to be who you are. If that isn't a microaggression, then what is? That's a macroaggression. Axia is, I can go on record by saying this is the only diagnostic provision that I frequently and on an ongoing basis refer people to. So lots of people say, where can I go? The waiting lists are huge. Where can I go if I choose to go privately? And I indefatigably go to Axia, and I've never regretted that. And very often, you probably don't know this, very often those same individuals come back to me, however much later, saying, thank you so much for that recommendation. I've never felt so valued. I've never realised that it was actually a nice process to go through. but actually going to Axia made it a nice process. One of the things that blows me away almost more than anything is the number of people that come back to me and say, for the first time in my life, I was actually listened to. And you just think, what? How can that be abnormal? That's really odd. But again, fair play to Axia for trailblazing, and hopefully people will follow. The rationale: autistic adults are underrepresented in research, as co-researchers, but also in terms of what research has done around being an autistic adult. Little research considers autistic adults as co-researchers. I say little, almost none. I think our project is trailblazing in a sense in terms of identifying. It was one of the stumbling blocks because we refused to accept the funding until the funders had agreed that we could regard our co-researchers as co-researchers. Even that was a stumbling block in terms of getting the money. As they said, no, you can't call them co-researchers, they're not academics, blah, 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 blah. At which point we said, how do you know they're not academics? It's quite an assumption to make, but anyway, we finally got past that stumbling block. And then this is the really depressing bit, so switch off if you don't want to hear the really depressing stuff on the next slide. But it's about aspects such as low life expectancy, high levels of poor mental health. We just need to know more about it. The world needs to know more about it. This is the most horrible slide, and you probably know this already, but just as a reminder. So autistic individuals without a learning disability die on average 16 years earlier, than the average population. So people often go, oh yeah, that's because people have got learning disabilities. So, no. This is without a learning disability. Your ordinary, everyday, average autistic person has 16 years less on Earth because they're autistic. Not because they're autistic in terms of physiological, but because of everything else. Because we're getting it wrong. Adults with a learning disability are 40 times more likely to die prematurely due to a neurological condition, epilepsy being the highest cause of death. The highest cause of death for adults without a learning disability is suicide. That's the lead cause of death, of premature death, which is horrific. And as we know, autistic adults are 9 times more likely. And then there's some very, very new research came out very recently, done by a friend of mine, or not, she was part of it, amazing woman, who is really interested in autistic doctors. They did a whole survey, anonymized survey of autistic doctors, and they found that I can't read this very well, sorry. 3/4 of those autistic doctors had considered suicide, and 1/4 of them had actually attempted suicide. And it was all as a direct relationship. There was a direct causal relationship interestingly, between identity first versus person first language and suicidation. So doctors were saying, if people consistently keep telling us that we're a person with autism, as if there's something we could do about it, there's a direct correlation between that and that lack of respect and everything that goes with it and our wish to no longer exist. Whereas people were saying, if we're actually more affirming in terms of the authentic autistic experience, and we embrace identity first language and everything that goes along with it, then it's much less likely that we're going to want to kill ourselves. Absolutely incredible statistics. But I've put horrifying, but they're not a surprise, which makes it even worse, I think. I tell you what, you could read a paper that myself and some colleagues have done, which is a review of the last 3 years of autism research and whether or not it lives up to the research requirements as dictated by the autistic community. That makes for really depressing reading because the answer is not very much. So basically, even within the academic field, we are not basically, simply put, we're not researching what autistic people want us to. Again, there's this complete lack of respect for actually autistic people and what they want. Whereas what I was really interesting. I was thinking, God, I've been in this field for decades. I've been in the field as a supposed academic for 20 years. Nobody really seems to be saying to autistic people, what's it like being you? Years ago, I woke up thinking, I want to write a paper one day called Why Do Autistic People Want to Kill Themselves?
Rethinking things through an autistic filter. Since being diagnosed with autism in my mid-30s, for me it was age 46, I've been rethinking a lot of things. Post-diagnosis has been a roller coaster of elation and depression and acceptance and reluctance, and I get to be me forever, said sometimes joyously and sometimes in pain. I'm autistic. I'm an autistic woman. I've spent a lifetime of trying to appear to be the same as everyone else. I've been watching. I've been studying. Every book, article, overheard conversation brings me that little bit closer to passing for normal. I've spent a long time thinking about who I ought to be. And I thought you were all doing it too. Maybe not everyone. Maybe a few of you were in on the secret. But I assumed, as we all do, that the way I see the world is the way everyone does. I've been working on analogies. I like analogies. They're pictures that you can lay over life to try to make sense of it. Since finding out who I am, I have been struck by several things. When you try to describe what being autistic is, everyone says, well, I do that too. People say this because it's hard to describe being autistic. Often you end up clutching a collection of behaviors, such as social exhaustion, hating the phone, wiggling your feet. How do you explain to someone what it's like to not have something that you don't even know exists? It's like trying to describe silence to someone who has always lived their life beneath a roaring waterfall. They won't hear the water. They'll take it for granted. They'll say, this is silence. How do I describe a lack of social processing to someone who doesn't know they do it? How do I describe how much active processing I put into everyday tasks, which they can happily do on automatic without noticing? When you've spent a lifetime pretending to be normal, you shouldn't be surprised that people think you're not autistic. People have told me how normal I am, how they don't see any part of me that is different. I think I should assume this is a compliment. I'm sure it's meant as one. To me, it's a mirror showing just how much effort I have put into being someone socially acceptable. Each aspect of me that is deemed presentable is an effort. It's a sort of me. It's a kind of me. But it ought not to be. I don't want a sanitized, socially acceptable me anymore. I want to be the me that I am. The me that I have always been. Because I am socially acceptable, I might be a bit peculiar if I let it all hang out. I might seem a bit less self-assured and a bit more terrified. But that's okay, isn't it? Other people get to break those rules. I may not be good at breaking rules, but maybe I can add new ones, a few sub-clauses here and there. It's what I'm striving for, being a bit more me. Now is the time.